incentive structure is directly influenced by the prevailing institutions. Here comes the institution. Many people mix up these two. They call, even the World Bank, I think we have come to a compromise solution that let's call institutions broadly, that includes the organizations. But if you look at institutional economics, they make a very clear distinction between institutions and organizations. What we mean by institutions is the rules of the game. Rules of the game meaning both formal, written rules and unwritten rules. There are conventions in a country. That is where culture comes in. And culture has lots of conventions. These are unwritten rules. The British Parliament operates entirely on conventions. They don't have a written set of procedures. And the sum total of all of those is what we call institutions. So that includes the procedures, the social norms and the conventions, the behavioral patterns, everything. It's a very broad but a very good definition of institutions. Some examples, I give you regulatory framework. Institutions are different from organizations because the institutions provide the framework within which organizations are evolved. Institutions are the rules and the organizations are the players, actually. Without institutions, you cannot have an organization. Organization is the byproduct of institutions. All organizations have an institutional structure, a procedural structure, rules. Here, institutions, rules of the game. These are the organizations which are the players. Why are they important? Because the institutions alter our behavior. They provide the incentives and they also provide the disincentives. There may be some regimes which do not believe in free trade. There may be some regimes which do not believe in free speech. These are institutions which provide disincentives for acquiring knowledge and applying them effectively. Institutions also affect the cost of exchange, what we in economics call the transaction cost. Sometimes institutions are built to reduce uncertainty because economic actors well-defined rules like the property rights. If we have well-defined property rights, which is part of the very important institution, we know that it provides a certain amount of stability, certain amount of certainty. I will not invest in a country where I am not so sure about the property rights, because tomorrow the government will come and acquire, or a party which supports the government will come and acquire my property. I have no recourse. I have no way of going back to a court system and get the property back. So no investor would go to a country where the property rights are uncertain. These are part of the institutions that are very critical for economic growth. Fourth, institutions will facilitate the flow of information because the information is a commodity like anything else. Sometimes if you have more access, better access to information, you can structure your education far better than those who are in another part of the world who do not have this information. So information is like a commodity where you go and purchase something in the supermarket. There are some good, what we call good and bad institutions that are important for growth. Here is a list of good institutions for growth. Well-defined property rights, institutions which can enforce them, like the court system. Implementation capacity matters of these institutions. Of course, they have to have well-educated judges and they have to have lawyers who are properly trained. Rules influencing credible policy making. Like the independence of the central bank. Why do we always ask the central bank to be independent? Why do we ask for balanced budget rules? Because these are critical institutions that will limit the discretion of any policymaker. And no policymaker can say, well, let's start printing money. Because the central bank governor is supposed to say no, because his only objective is to maintain the monetary policy of the country. Same way the balanced budget. Limits on borrowing, such as the UK's golden rule, of course, that was very effective until recently. Intergovernmental transfers based on objective. We deal with this issue all the time in all the countries. The central government provides transfers to regions based on negotiations, not based on any objective criteria. So the World Bank and other agencies have been saying, no, this is not the way to do it. Let's come up with a formula. It's a formula-based system that is transparent to everyone. All the policymakers, those who are in the government, opposition, NGOs, scholars can really examine the formula and see the amount of allocation that is given to each region. 2 minutes. We should not ignore the fact that political institutions are sometimes much more powerful than economists. Economists have to very grudgingly admit to that, but the supremacy of politics cannot be ignored. The challenge is to come up with a hierarchy of political institutions. This is something we have so far not got from the political scientists. Political scientists, as far as I'm concerned, are very great scholars, but they explain the world. As Karl Marx said, that the point is not to explain the world, the point is to change. Remember, in German ideology, he gave this very classic statement. Marx, I would agree to that extent only. Most of what Marx said totally wrong, I think, in terms of its applicability, but he was right on this. And what political scientists have not so far been able to come up with is a hierarchy of institutions, political institutions, based on their effectiveness, efficacy, that we can rely on so that we can formulate economic policies to suit that hierarchy. Then we'll have a very good idea of where these policies are going to be implemented, how effective they are going to be implemented. This is something still lacking. Is it democracy? Well, I wouldn't say democracy per se is the key ingredient of economic growth, because there are countries without democracy. Initially, South Korea, Taiwan, they were dictatorships. Even China under Deng Xiaoping was not a real democracy. Some might even say Singapore was not a democracy. I disagree. I have a great regard for the Singaporean model. Of course, you can always question some of those elements, but I think many people have questioned about Singapore democracy there. But that's not democracy per se that will guarantee you the economic growth. Sri Lanka India has been democratic countries for a long time. Is it the protection of private property? This is a very important one. And another issue that we still have not fully understood is why most dictatorships have led to a degradation of the economy. Whereas only in few cases, like in South Korea under Kim, General Kim, and in Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek and many others, later in different countries, even Mahathir, I would say, these countries have been able to